Warning, you are about to hear truths and facts about sexual exploitation of women and girls and a dose of much needed reality. Yasmin Vafa is the co-founder and executive director of Rights4Girls and returns to the Warriors to discuss groundbreaking new report plus breaking news just launched Rights4Girls campaign around the NCAA March Madness cities. Yes, that's basketball. Everybody will be talking about event that's going to be happening that you may see billboards. Maybe you'll see them in your town or city. Rights4Girls advocates for the dignity and rights of young women and girls so that every girl can be safe and live a life free of violence and exploitation. The website is rights4girls.org. We will have all of this information, Yasmin. Relax. It's going to be in the body of the video so everybody can take their time, read, donate, go crazy with helping us. But I want to point out, you are such a warrior. Welcome back, Yasmin Vafa, to the Warriors.
Thanks for having me, Lynn.
Of course. Now, I know you're busy, but my first question is, how are you?
Good, yeah, as good as can be these days, but staying very busy. There's lots going on, as you know, all over the country. So we're definitely staying very, very busy for sure.
Well, as I like to say, let's rock and roll, because I'm very hopeful, Yasmin. I think so much is going on. There's a lot of energy out there, a lot of talk, a lot of discussion. Things are moving right along. So I want to jump right in and start with this most excellent Rights4Girls recent report of 2025, Buyers Unmasked, exposing the men who buy sex and solutions to end exploitation. Again, Warriors, this full report will be in the body of the video. You're going to take your time. You're going to read it. You're going to ask questions. You're going to contact us. But I want to start with why this? Why did you focus on this?
Well, as you know, the last few years, there has been a really well-funded, well-coordinated campaign across the country to fully decriminalize prostitution. And when we, hear about this, typically we hear about it as decriminalizing sex work. And so people don't often realize that when we hear about this, it actually means decriminalizing not just the people who are selling sex, but also decriminalizing acts of pimping, of sex buying, and also brothel keeping. And so this really is a sex trade expansionist movement, and a movement that will actually lead to increased sex trafficking of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And so we have been working in coalition with survivor leaders from several jurisdictions throughout the country and partner organizations to really combat a rise of these bills in several states, Vermont, Oregon, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, New York, Massachusetts, and Louisiana, Washington, D.C. I mean, several states, even ballot initiatives. Oregon had a ballot initiative a couple of years ago. And, we felt that it was really important to realize that this is not innocuous behavior. And, typically when we would talk to legislators, even survivors would go in and say, this is not victimless. These buyers are not just shy guys who can't get dates. It was really difficult. I mean, people have almost been conditioned in many cases to think legalization or decriminalization, it will just make things better. It will bring it out of the shadows. There's just so many talking points that have been mainstreamed and normalized through the media. I mean, just look, Honora just swept the Oscars, people forget we're dealing with this multi-billion-dollar industry that has just that has lobbyists, that has PR, that has just worked to really change the culture and normalize the sex trade. And so we felt that nothing could be more powerful than letting buyers speak for themselves. And so what we wanted to do was take these quotes from sex buyers themselves off of these hobby boards. And for those who don't know, these are essentially these review boards where sex buyers go and they rate and review the people that they purchase for sex, mostly women, but sometimes young girls. I mean, several of the quotes that we published refer to very young individuals, and they openly rate them. So they kind of function as a Yelp for prostitution. And, we highlighted buyers in their own words, and we felt, nothing could really convey the attitudes and characteristics of these individuals better than themselves. And so we put them into regions. Northeast, Southern United States, West Coast, Midwest, and really wanted to show that these attitudes are consistent, across the country. We also showcased some conversations from, organizations like the EPIC Project, which is an organization run by male allies in the movement that really work to disrupt the demand for commercial sex that fuels sex trafficking. And what they do is basically set these decoy ads. And then when men go to solicit sex, they engage them in conversations and basically say, hey, this isn't actually a real ad, but, have you considered that what you're doing is harmful, or that sex trafficking is really prevalent, or that this behavior might be harmful to you? Why do you do this? And so, we basically took a number of those conversations as well to show, irrespective of the venue, these attitudes are consistent. It's not just the hobby boards. Even in these types of conversations, sex buyer attitudes are consistent. And then we analyzed them and basically noted that across, we looked at 89 different types of conversations that, X number showed, racism and fetishization. So for example, a preference for certain types of women and girls based on race or ethnicity. X number showed blatant misogyny or, fetishization. X number showed a blatant disregard for signs of coercion or trafficking. So for example, some of them noted that there was a pimp right there or nearby and didn't go to help the person. They really were just noting it as a warning to other buyers, like, heads up, there might be a pimp in the closet, be careful. But they didn't try to help the woman. And so we've just noted these realities and ultimately concluded that buyers are fully aware and indifferent to signs of trafficking, coercion, severe drug abuse and dependency, desperation, and intimidation in the women and individuals that they purchase for sex. And so as a result, this behavior has to be held accountable. And so what the report does is ultimately analyze the two really dominant forms of sex trade reform that are being debated right now, which is full decriminalization and really partial decriminalization, or what's better known as the survivor model, or what people call the Swedish model. And so what we do is really evaluate them using case studies. So we looked at New Zealand and Australia and Rhode Island. Many people don't know Rhode Island experimented with decriminalization of indoor prostitution for a 29-year period. And it was such a disaster that they changed their laws back. So we look at those models and we conclude that the survivor model that, offers legal protection to prostituted people, gives them services, but maintains the criminal penalties for pimping, brothels, and purchasing sex, is the most successful model because it is shown to reduce trafficking and change the culture over time to really discourage these types of behaviors. And the societies that have done that have the highest levels of gender equality. And it's really looked down upon in those societies to, solicit sex, to go to the strip club, to really objectify women. The levels of gender-based violence are really lower in those societies as compared to Germany, the Netherlands, and those other countries. And so I was actually just at the Swedish embassy. This has been the UN Commission on the Status of Women 2 weeks. And, they were noting just the successes of this model decades after it's been put into effect. And it's significant as compared to, Germany and the Netherlands that implemented legalization of prostitution during the same time periods. And, the Netherlands is looking to shut down 1/3 of its window brothels. Germany has 1.2 million sex buyers per day, and a huge problem with trafficking and organized crime. And, most of the women who are prostituted there aren't German women, they're trafficked women from, Romania, obviously Ukrainian refugees, and, women who are trafficked from Latin America as well as Africa. And so it's a huge problem and something that, we need to tackle here as well.
Now, you just said a mouthful, and
Yes.
you made my brain go crazy because I have so many questions. I'll try to stay focused with you, Yasmin. But first thing is that best movie. I'm just going to leave it at that, right? I can't even say Oscar, Hollywood. I don't even say that anymore. Um, Honora. Nobody saw that movie at all. Nobody cared about that movie. Pure piece of propaganda. That's my
Yes.
2 cents. Nobody watched it until after the fact. I actually did so I could speak about it
Yeah.
after the fact. But I'm telling you, beforehand, like nobody knew about it. Nobody, but that's what we're dealing with. We always have,
Yes.
media or Hollywood talking about, how great it is, right? You can live this life and control and be in control. And we all know propaganda based on your good work at Rights4Girls. You bring up another thing. You used a lot of you were inspired a lot by the sex buyers in New York City, New York State. And I
Yes.
was part of that a while ago with our group here, New Yorkers for the Equality Model. And when I saw these quotes for the first time, Yasmin, I got sick. I'm not kidding. The way they just talk about girls and women, human beings, is sickening. I had to stop reading things because it was just
Yeah.
so sickening that people do this. But I think it's a very good thing to put this in everybody's faces so they understand. They have to be shocked into taking action, at least understanding what's going on. Because you bring up, people think this is so harmless. They tell me this all the time. They do not understand the full scope. And that is why this report, ending demand, the buyers, let's focus. New York, we're not focused on them too much around here. I can tell you that. And across the country, as you well know, that is key to intervening and stopping a lot of these behaviors, right? The other thing you bring up is the male voice. I have
Hmm.
been rallying that we have to bring more men to the table, and I'm so happy to see it finally happening. We need men to support women, right? To come into our groups, talk about it, and also, and I digress here a little bit, to be supportive of our boys and young men. We want them to
Yes.
be voices for them. So overall, I'm seeing so many great changes. I'm so hopeful. I want to talk about, you mentioned survivor model, Swedish model. Am I correct in calling it a quality model?
Yes, I mean there's many different terms. I mean, in Europe, for example, they call it the abolition model. In South Africa, they call it the Sankara model. So I think for us, we use in the report the survivor model just because it's terminology that is
I
usable
love it.
throughout the United States.
I love it.
There's some jurisdictions where it's confused. For example, in Illinois, we have a full decrim bill pending right now, and the main organization that is pushing that bill is called Equality Illinois. So the
Oh,
equality model won't work in Illinois because people associate full decrim with Equality Illinois. So we wanted to have terminology that was usable throughout the entire country, and the survivor model is something that really was survivor led, and something that a lot of the survivors that we spoke with really supported, and really made sense as to what we were talking about.
yes.
This is survivor centered legislation that puts the survivor first and is the only model that actually offers survivor services and support. The other model really doesn't. It really just says this is a form of job, a form of work, and is a job like any other. And why would we offer you services? We don't do that for other forms of work. So, and we have no problem with expanding it and putting it out in the open and luring more people into it because it is a job like any other. And if you believe that, then, the approach makes sense. And we fundamentally just don't agree with that, right? We think that the solution is to reduce the number of people involved and ultimately, uh, get rid of it altogether because it is harmful in every instance, that you ultimately cannot erase the long-term physical and psychological harms that come with repeated
Yeah.
unwanted sex with strangers. That is what the fundamental harm of prostitution is.
Yeah, I love it being called the survivor model because I actually think
Mhm.
a quality model, and as you pointed out, like it's confusing for people,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
survivor model just tells you what it is. Let's focus for a second on you touched on a few things, but the survivor, the importance of the survivor leader in all of this work. I
Yes.
have never been trafficked, so I need to depend on you and your research and the voice of the survivor and their experiences, if they're willing to share and all that. We need to put, in my opinion, more resources into them, more focus on them, more leadership on them. What are your thoughts about all this?
Absolutely. I mean, all of our work is informed by survivors, their voices, their experience. I mean, in the report, we try to open every section with a quote from a survivor, especially the case studies, you know, a survivor from New Zealand, a survivor from Australia, a survivor from Rhode Island, survivor leader from New York who talks about his experiences there, and the importance of combating demand. And so I think it's very important to really center our policies around, you know, the experiences of survivor leaders, especially those who have exited the sex trade and have been able to really analyze their experiences. You know, many of them have told us that when they were still in the sex trade, they, you know, spoke about their experiences very differently, largely as a coping mechanism because they were still in it and it was a survival tactic. You know, many of them say that if they were still in it, they would have been saying, yes, I'm choosing this. Yes, I'm, you know, I'm doing this of my own volition, and, you know, I'm choosing to do this, and I don't want it any other way. But that same survivor, if they've been able to exit the industry and have access to supportive services and interventions, will tell you something very different, you know, 5-10 years later. We'll say, like, that was a very abusive, violent, and exploitative experience, and that wasn't my choice. In fact, they may have been a minor when they were started in the industry. And, you know, actually, that wasn't my choice. That's not what I wanted to be doing. But here were my circumstances. And that was the best option I had out of a whole host of really terrible options at the time. And so this is actually my understanding of my experience today. And so it's really important to speak with both individuals who are experiencing the sex trade currently, as well as those who have exited. So I think it's really important to have our policies guided by those who are, you know, have that lived experience. It's essential.
Yes, I agree. I think it's one of the, I'll say, most important things. Now, in your executive summary, you say, at a time when misogyny and male violence against women and girls are pervasive, it is more important than ever to commit to a future that upholds safety, justice, and equality as our collective priorities. I am here to ask the question I think I always ask you. Why is all of this so hard? Because I have to say, Yasmin, every day I'm inundated with stories, not only here in the US, but around the globe, of these abuses towards women and girls. To me, things seem to be getting worse and worse. I have a little life experience now, decades, you know, on my calendar, so to speak. It's getting, to me, worse and worse, as much as there's so much hope, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is this all so hard? And don't
I
tell
mean,
me it's the dollar sign. It probably is, but you know.
You know, I think we're unfortunately at a real crossroads right now. I think particularly in the US, but I think all over. As you said, you know, women's rights and girls' rights have always been a struggle. But as you said, you know, I'm hopeful. And I think that, you know, we can and must insist on the dignity and rights of especially, you know, women, girls, and children. And I think we can push forward. And I think we just continue to insist on those rights. And, you know, especially by creating partnerships with traditional and non-traditional allies. I mean, to your point earlier about enlisting men in the movement to end, you know, male violence against women and girls is critical. We highlight a number of organizations like, you know, Men Can Stop Rape, A Call to Men, Epic Project, and others that are doing this work day in and day out. And we highlight, you know, some of the conditions that render our country particularly vulnerable to increased gender-based violence. I mean, the CDC stats from the last few years around teen girls in the US have been alarming, to put it mildly. You know, teen girls in the US are not doing well. You know, the rates of suicidal ideation, sexual violence, you know, 1 in 5 teen girls has experienced sexual violence, 1 in 10 has been raped. And we know sexual violence and child abuse in this country run across boundaries of race, class, ethnicity. But, you know, it's very alarming when you know, in our report, we talk about, you know, this phenomenon of young men and boys feeling very lonely, of them being increasingly isolated and, you know, chronically online, and finding camaraderie in the manosphere, which can be very toxic. And, when they're starting to idolize very, misogynistic characters like, the Tate brothers and
Oh,
things like that, So
yes.
I think that is very alarming. And when there aren't avenues for young men and boys to, connect with others and connect, in person and, basically deal with that loneliness, it can breed this type of, antisocial, violent behavior that fuels behaviors like sex buying and other forms of gender-based violence. And that is what we kind of warn about in the report, that we need more of these men's groups and, mentoring and other ways to kind of engage young men and boys in aspects of, for lack of a better term, healthy masculinity. And that's why it's so important. I know you and I have talked about, these school programs that teach concepts around healthy relationships, consent, and mutuality from an early age. It's very important to teach those concepts to both boys and girls early on, because when they are taught those things, it's very young people get it and they absorb it. And even right now, there's been studies to show that, boys and girls, they see each other as equals, in school. And so it's important to start teaching those concepts, because they will be exposed to things like pornography at a young age. And the messages that they are absorbing through things like pornography are incredibly violent and incredibly damaging, both to girls and boys. And when you factor in all of these things that we're talking about, the antisocial behavior, who they're being told by our media to idolize, the bombardment of the pro-sex trade, messaging and propaganda, it really breeds harmful, violent behaviors that ultimately land, hardest on women and girls. And so it's just very important to understand where we are as a culture right now and how to counteract those messages that are being received by young people.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw the word in again, Yasmin. I'm very hopeful. After
Yeah.
just spending some time with sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, I have to tell you, they were so smart
Yes.
about things. And this is the age range, it's not their fault. They're born into this digital bubble. The schools
Right.
expect them to do their work, on the Chromebooks and the laptops.
Exactly.
And they are inundated, dangerous algorithms. We won't go there, but we have all the studies with all of this, what the kids are facing, the landscape they're facing. And the biggest fear is, the public has become, it's become so normalized, as you pointed out, whether it's through media, influencers, whatever celebrity going on is in our country today, our world today, and that people just become, habituated. We cannot
Exactly.
allow that. And I see with Rights4Girls in this new report, we're not allowing it. We are not going to allow our children at all, our women, our girls to grow up like this, our boys too, but our girls, this is not right. But I just want to point out, I was just so impressed with sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. They were almost smarter. This is terrible than a couple of the high school groups. So that's why it gives me hope.
Right.
They were like a different mindset than the older kids.
Because they haven't been tainted yet, right?
I don't know. Eighth grade is like an adult these days. So I don't know. I mean, some of these boys were like, 6'5".
Wow.
They were like men.
Yeah.
They look like in the eighth grade. And I was just so proud of them. So we're going to continue that with all of our young people and our girls. And these girls were like, no, nobody's going to put it over on me. And I was like, yeah,
Good.
you're a warrior kind of thing.
I
All
love
right.
that.
Now we have to switch into your brand new breaking campaign, as I like to call it. Okay. March Madness. How appropriate. It is a nationwide billboard campaign to combat sex trafficking, tourism surrounding the NCAA. Got to spell that out for some warriors. National Collegiate Athletic Association. March Madness basketball tournament, everybody. Sports events, Yasmin, as you point out in all of this, can bring a lot of joy, can bring a lot of people, lots of revenue for businesses and cities, but that also brings always increased forms of exploitation, including trafficking, all kinds of crime. Tell us about the campaign. And I just want to, before you tell us, can you imagine, Yasmin, if all of this focus we have on sports in this country was put on the issues you talk about it, Rights4Girls, and can you imagine how great that would be? That's my dream, that, well, I like to say a girl can dream. But if we had some 10% of that focus as people go crazy for all kinds of sports on this, but we're going to get there because this campaign is starting it. This is starting it. So tell us about the campaign.
Yeah, so we launched this campaign to really shed light on the buyers that are fueling the market that leads to sex trafficking. And, what we wanted to really point out is that, anytime there is a mass influx of predominantly men, but really any type of tourism to one area, one big city, it can really lead to traffickers seeking to capitalize off the potential for increased demand. And so it doesn't always lead, obviously, to increased sex trafficking, but the fact that there are so many, predominantly men flocking to one city, traffickers seek to profit off of the potential for increased demand. And so we do see a corresponding increase, for example, in sex ads online. And in the past, we have seen, arrests and prosecutions related to sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. We know that in just one Final Four weekend, there were several arrests made relating to sexual exploitation and trafficking. So just during one past Final Four weekend, there were 47 men arrested for felony solicitation of a minor, 11 people arrested for sex trafficking and promoting prostitution, which is, better known as pimping, and 28 sex trafficking victims recovered, including one child victim. And so we decided to launch this, nationwide billboard campaign where we're going to have billboards going up throughout all the 8 hosting cities for the games. So they'll be targeting the initial rounds in Cleveland, Milwaukee, and Providence. And then we'll be going through the regionals in Atlanta, Indianapolis, and Newark, New Jersey, and then all the way through the finals in San Antonio, Texas. And so the goal is really to expose the realities of the sex trade and the harm inflicted by sex buyers on vulnerable women and girls. And so the billboards have a series of messages, depending on whether it'll be a digital billboard or, a static billboard. They'll have different messages, and folks can go on our website at rights4girls.org/March Madness to see all the billboards and the corresponding, information and statistics that go with them to learn more. But basically, there are a series of ads that say things like, it's madness to think sex buying is just a game, or, sex buying is foul, or it's madness to think sex buying is a victimless crime. And they all correspond to, individual data and statistics that will tell you more about, women and girls in the sex industry.
And don't you worry, Yasmin, I'm having the full report in the body of this video, and I'll be forcing everybody to leverage the internet for good and share on their platforms because, it sounds very basic, but this will raise awareness. And that's exactly what we need, raising awareness. Now, that being said, because I've had this said to me so many times, I saw something, I didn't know what to do, or I saw something 20 years ago. What do you think? So obviously raising awareness is a good thing. People will go on the website, they'll read, they'll share on their platforms. What do you suggest, though, if somebody actually is at one of these games or in the town, or what should they do?
I mean, it's really important to call the human trafficking hotline if you think you see an instance of, human trafficking. I mean, for sure, call the human trafficking hotline. It's 888-373-7888. You can always text the number as well. It's 233-733 in any instance if you are concerned about something that you're seeing. But, the goal is to really spread awareness. And I think a lot of people, think that this is really an innocuous crime. And over the years, I will say, the media and in our culture, there's a lot of tolerance for sex buying. But recently, we have seen a number of states really up the charge of patronizing or sex buying to a felony. I mean, Texas was kind of really led the charge, but then Missouri. And then this year, we're seeing a number of states really consider very serious charges against sex buyers, hefty fines, criminal sanctions, even registering as a sex offender. So like Idaho, Nevada, Kansas, New Jersey, Nebraska, Virginia, South Carolina, Oklahoma, New Hampshire, Illinois, Washington State, all have bills pending this legislative session that significantly increase penalties for sex buyers. So, it's important to realize that. And then, I think other people don't necessarily realize that these types of convictions can result in loss of professional license, loss of employment, and even losing family law rights like child custody, child visitation. So we point out some of these things on the website as well, because, some jurisdictions might be more lax, but other ones are starting to really up the ante when it comes to sex buying. And it's important for folks to realize what's at stake.
Yeah, and this is such great news. And I mean great when I say this, because the only thing that's going to really get in at all of this is holding those accountable who cause harm, or else it's just this runaway train and we're in this vicious circle. So I think this is terrific news. I'm seeing the pendulum swinging in a very positive, direction for all of this. Yasmin, finish us up. Some final words, and everybody report, campaign, everything's in the body of the video. You're going to take your time. You're going to read through everything. You're going to share everything, but give us your expertise, your final words. What do you want everybody to know?
Well, I think, as you said, I'm feeling very hopeful, but I think ultimately, we do have to come together around this issue and realize that, unfortunately, whether folks are on the left or on the right, there is, unfortunately, too much common ground when it comes to exploiting women and girls. And so this is an issue where we need folks to come together and realize that the harms that are being experienced by our women, girls, and our children really are too severe to ignore. And so if we can have folks come together, understand what's at stake and what's at risk, and really just, I know, our report is a little long, but if folks can read it and just understand what's at stake, and what's happening throughout the US today, like there is a hearing today in Rhode Island on a full decriminalization bill. Again, a bill that seeks to repeal acts of pimping, sex buying, and brothel keeping, would render those acts legal in the state of Rhode Island. And, we're dealing with this in multiple states. And Illinois has a bill. New York has a bill. This is happening all over the US, and there's a handful of us working against these pieces of legislation. And so we just urge folks to, understand what's at stake and to support our efforts in, fighting against these regressive efforts, and, to defend our young women and girls, because really we're at a crossroads, I think, today.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because when I explain in the middle of New York City, you can have a brothel next door. You can live on Park Avenue. You can live anywhere. They're like, what? Who would allow that? I'm like, well, it's actually happening. They're talking. Nobody seems to really know about this in the general public.
And these issues are tied. I mean, there is a strip club here in DC called the Cloakroom, which is a play on, that's what, the Senate and House, that when they vote, they called it the Senate Cloakroom. It's a nod to, Capitol Hill. But the DC Attorney General is suing them for violation of the DC Human Rights Act, basically found numerous human rights abuses, wage theft, sexual exploitation, sexual harassment, and other types of, verbal abuse and harassment of the women and girls who are working there, many young women. And shocker, for those of us who work in, this industry, we know that this is very common, but, these issues are deeply connected. The sex industry is violent and it's exploitative, and it preys on young women and girls. And, these issues are deeply connected, and, you just can't responsibly patronize the sex industry in any way, shape, or form. And people just have to understand that it's violent and it's exploitative, and really just be more responsible about it and get educated on, how women and girls end up there, and, the importance of really, supporting efforts to, help women and girls exit this industry. with other viable forms of employment, and support. And so I think it's just important to understand how these issues are linked and, what they can do to really stop, the demand.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. People do not understand, what's behind the door, right?
Yes.
They don't even, we have these salons here, which law
Right.
enforcement tells me we haven't even addressed yet, that are just, rife with all of this abuse. The one thing, Yasmin, I want to tell you, I find so shocking is that here in New York, I know in New Jersey, we have a lot of women now, pimping out girls and women. I find that so incredibly shocking that they would even do that. I'm just throwing that out there
Yeah.
because I can't believe in the last 2 years how I've seen and been told of such an increase with females doing it to girls and women. So we're going to stop that because
Yeah.
we are not allowing that at all. Well, both reports, Buyers Unmasked and March Madness, will be in the body of the video. I've told you all of that, everybody. What we have to do now is you'll go to rights4girls.org and you're going to hit the donate button because it's Yasmin,
Yeah.
research costs money, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
also your report is not too long. I don't like you said that.
No, no.
I'll tell
Yeah.
you why.
I
They
just,
should stay off of TikTok or Facebook for 10 minutes a day and read it in
yes.
pieces. And
Yeah.
then
It's
they'll
not,
get
I
the
mean, it's
whole
not too long. Exactly.
no,
Yeah.
no. I
They
mean,
should,
just facetiously, I'm saying like they can get off the TikTok, they can get off the Facebook, they can read this in pieces
yes.
and absorb it, right? And you'll come back next week and we'll get everybody across the country a tutorial because people have to know what goes on behind the scenes and they
Yes.
really don't know. That's why this is so fantastic. Well, open those wallets, everybody, and those purses. Like I said, things cost money, research costs money, time costs money. Rights for Girls is doing the much needed, the most necessary work in order to aid us in all of this and to rid and to begin to, we don't want to keep slapping this band-aid on everything. We want to get rid of it. And this is the way we have to get in there with rights4girls.org. I can't say enough great things about you, Yasmin Vafa. The website, again, everybody, rights4girls.org. Thank you. Thank you, Yasmin. You are such a warrior. Let us speak again soon.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Take care.
Take care.